Zion Williamson finally got into shape and the rest of the NBA is terrified. Basically, as soon as Zion got drafted, it was pretty apparent that this guy was an extremely talented player, and really the biggest issue with him wasn't even necessarily due to anything on the court, but it was more so due to the fact that he was struggling with his weight. And the reason why that's important is that in turn led him to be more susceptible to injuries. So the fact that Zion is in shape currently is a significant factor for him. But quickly, before we get the video started, for those of you who may not know, I'm Juicy Sports, I make opinionative NBA content, and if you guys enjoy videos similar to this, hit that subscribe button, that like button, and that post notification bell. I also want to quickly mention that I recently started up an MMA channel, and if you guys are interested in that, the link will be in the description. But anyways, let's get into it. Zion Williamson has been one of the most highly touted prospects in a very long time, probably since 2003 with LeBron James. The expectations that most had for Zion was a high-level superstar type player, which of course would be extremely difficult for anybody to live up to and would be an uphill climb for anybody. Because the real issue with a player that has that level of expectations is, let's just say for the sake of the video, that a player like Zion or a different player that had that same level of expectations became a perennial all-star for his career. Some fans may still have the opinion that that player was a draft bust due to the fact that they never truly lived up to the expectations that those fans set for him on draft day. And those kind of expectations could also certainly ruin a player's career, because let's just say, for example, a player of those expectations turned out to be an all-star type player, at least earlier on into their career. But if as their career went on and people started to put more and more pressure on that player to live up to those expectations of being a superstar type guy, that player might eventually realize that and try to do a little too much out there by maybe taking too many shots and not be efficient in turn, or maybe try to push the pace a little too much and get too many turnovers. But eventually, if that player is trying to do too much for a long stretch of time, they'll eventually start to play poorly and have a bad stretch. And if that were to be the case, they would probably in turn lose their confidence. And I do mention this in a lot of my videos, but whenever a player loses their confidence, that's probably the worst thing that can happen to them. And of course, the best of the best are able to lose their confidence and then regain it and then become a better player for it. But there's been a ton of examples of players in the league that had a ton of talent earlier on into their career, but eventually they started to lose their confidence and they just never regained that status that they had earlier on into their careers. So basically the point that I'm trying to make is having those level of expectations could certainly be a detriment to any player. But it seemed like in Zion's case, he wasn't necessarily getting affected by those expectations, as in his rookie season, he had a very good statistical year, averaging 22.5 points per game on 58% shooting from the field, 6.2 rebounds on 2.1 assists on only 27 minutes per game as well. Now, of course, in his rookie season, he didn't necessarily play all that many games, only 24 games on the year, as injuries were certainly a factor, but overall, after that rookie season, people were very excited about how Zion was playing, not only due to his statistics, but also just watching him out there on the court. He just looked phenomenal. But of course, after his rookie season, the biggest concern about him was certainly his injuries. But fortunately for Zion and the Pelicans, he actually played very well in his second year, but he also played a good amount of games. In his second season, he averaged 27 points per game on 61% shooting from the field, 7.2 rebounds on 3.7 assists. And he also played 61 games that year, which of course isn't necessarily phenomenal, but when you consider that injuries were a big concern for Zion and he only played 24 games in his first year, it was certainly an improvement. But unfortunately for Zion, in his third season, the injury bug somewhat came back as he didn't play whatsoever. It was somewhat of an odd injury due to the fact that there was a lot of secrecy in regards to it. And towards the middle and the tail end of the season, it seemed like there was a disconnect between Zion and the Pelicans. As on one hand, there's reports that started to come out saying that Zion would have played by the end of the year, but as those dates started to come and go, there was no movement in relation to Zion coming back, and of course Zion didn't end up playing. So at that point, there was somewhat of a concern about the disconnect between Zion and the Pelicans and whether or not Zion wanted to stay with New Orleans long term. But at the end of the day, the biggest concern about Zion was definitely his injuries, and a lot of people were starting to compare him to Greg Oden due to the fact that both of these guys of course were extremely talented, but they both didn't necessarily get to play all that much throughout their careers due to injuries. Now of course Zion is extremely early on into his career, but there was a stat that came out saying that Zion has only played 3 more games than Greg Oden up until this point, which of course isn't a good thing to see. But that kind of takes us to the point where we're at currently. We're going into his 4th season. There certainly still are some concerns about his injury history, but at the same time, there's a lot of enthusiasm. And I think most of the enthusiasm comes from the fact that there was a report that came out a little bit ago saying that Zion would be fully clear for basketball activities and there would be no restrictions. But also when you consider that Zion has been trying to get into shape over the past few months, and at this point it does seem like he's in great shape, there's definitely a lot to be excited about. Because it's pretty clear that once he's on the court, Zion is extremely talented. So if Zion could get into shape and consistently stay healthy for the most part, there's definitely a lot to be excited about. But now, what are my expectations for Zion, and why do I think the rest of the NBA is terrified? Well, before I get into it, I do want to mention that I think the Pelicans are going to take it somewhat slow. I think they're going to do something similar to what they've done in the past, where Zion wouldn't play back-to-backs, and he also would get some rest days sprinkled in there as well. I don't necessarily think that Zion's going to come in and right away play every single game, even though he is unrestricted. And in my opinion, based upon the amount of injuries that Zion has gone through throughout his young NBA career, I definitely think that's the right decision. Even though they've been doing that and he still has gotten hurt a bunch throughout his career, I still think that is the right way to go. But in terms of my expectations, I would definitely expect Zion to play a decent amount of games this season, at least 60 games I would say. If he plays under that, that would definitely be somewhat of a disappointment to me personally. If he plays over that, I would definitely be happy about it, but that's probably where I would set my expectations around for Zion. But in terms of his actual play, when he's on the court, I fully expect him to pick up where he left off, averaging around 22 to 28 points per game. I just think it's pretty clear that he's that level of player. Once he's healthy and he's on the court, he's just a generational talent. Once driving all the way to the basket, he's basically unstoppable. He's just too strong, too athletic, too powerful. There's just nothing players could do once he gets a full head of steam. It's either going to be he dunks over you, he finishes around you with crafty layups, or he gets an and-one finish. Or of course you just foul him. In terms of his passing and playmaking ability, that's also a very underrated aspect of his game, and I do expect that to continuously improve as the seasons do progress, but already at this point it's very good considering his size and position. Defensively, he does a really nice job at playing off-ball defense, utilizing that great athleticism to get weak side blocks. In terms of his on-ball defense, I would say he's pretty good at this point. Of course, you would like to see him improve upon that slightly, but overall, in terms of his scoring ability, his passing and playmaking ability, his defensive ability overall, his basketball IQ, this guy is just great from top to bottom. And if he's able to be healthy for the most part this season, I would certainly expect him to make the All-Star team this year. But overall, even with all the injuries, I still do have very high expectations for Zion. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think the rest of the NBA is scared of Zion, or do you not think so? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy it, check one of these two videos popping up now, and until the next time, peace out guys.